You've seen them. Not the loud ones, not the ones preaching peace, while screaming over everyone they're different. These are the ones who enter a room without fanfare, yet something in the air shifts. They don't seek the spotlight, and yet somehow the light always finds them. They're not trying to be known. They're trying to stay whole. This is the silent empathone of the most misunderstood, underestimated, and paradoxically dangerous archetypes in the psychological landscape. And if Carl Jung were here today, he'd likely say they are the living embodiment of someone who has integrated both light and shadow. They're not people pleasers, they're not martyrs, and they're certainly not the ones constantly posting their compassion like a badge. These are the ones who feel everything, but reveal almost nothing. While others overshare to be seen, the silent empath guards their emotional realm like sacred ground. They're not closed off, they're calibrated. They've learned that silence is sometimes the loudest answer, and that stillness is a language of its own. What makes them so haunting, so magnetic is this: they see you, all of you, without judgment, without drama, without noise, and that very presence, it terrifies the narcissist. Because narcissists depend on chaos to control. They rely on confusion to dominate. They manipulate through smoke, mirrors, noise. But what happens when the person across from them refuses to engage in the illusion? When their silence isn't weakness but X-ray vision? The silent empath becomes both a craving and a curse for the narcissist. Craving because the empath offers depth, presence, and a kind of validation the narcissist desperately needs. Curse because that same empath holds up a mirror that reflects everything the narcissist is trying to run from. And unlike most, the silent empath doesn't react. They perceive. They don't fight. They withdraw. And that subtle retreat is far more powerful than any confrontation. Because when a narcissist meets someone they can't unnerve, can't manipulate, can't make spin in circles just to earn breadcrumbs of validation, they begin to lose control. And losing control, for a narcissist, is equivalent to losing identity. This is why the silent empath is not just their worst match, they are their worst nightmare. You don't need to say a word. That's the unnerving part. The silent empath doesn't speak to understand, they already do. Their power isn't in what they say, it's in what they sense. Every sigh, every shift in energy, every carefully masked emotion, nothing goes unnoticed. They walk into a room and, without effort, begin to decode it. Not just the mood, but the motives. Not just the words, but the wounds behind them. And this is where the narcissist's game starts to unravel. Narcissists thrive in distortion. They operate in the blur between what they say and what they mean, between how they appear and who they are. Their control depends on that gap staying hidden. But the silent empath sees it instantly. And worse for the narcissist, they don't call it out. They just know. That knowing is destabilizing. Because narcissists rely on reaction. They provoke to extract emotional currency. But the silent empath doesn't pay in panic or confusion. They offer stillness instead. And in that stillness, the narcissist sees something they can't access: clarity. Not the intellectual kind, but the kind that pierces the illusion without a single word spoken. Have you ever felt someone looking at you like they already knew the parts of yourself you hide? That's what the silent empath does. They look through, not at. Their presence doesn't confront, it exposes. It's not aggression, it's accuracy. And that's terrifying to someone who survives by keeping the truth just out of reach. Because what can a narcissist do with someone who doesn't flinch, doesn't fawn, doesn't fight, who doesn't need to scream to be heard, because their silence says everything? They can't twist it. They can't bait it. They can't control it. And that powerlessness begins to eat at them, slowly and secretly. The empath's silence is not passive, it's precision. It's not absence, it's a mirror. And every time the narcissist sees themselves reflected without distortion, without flattery, without the fog of manipulation, they begin to fracture. Not because the empath attacked them, but because, for the first time, someone saw everything and chose not to feed the illusion. And in the narcissist world, that is a kind of violence they were never prepared for. Narcissists need opponents. They need someone to chase, someone to bait, someone to perform the emotional dance with them, pushing and pulling, reacting and unraveling. They crave the drama because it makes them feel real, relevant, in control. But then they meet the silent empath, and suddenly there's no dance, no reaction, no participation, just stillness, observation, precision, and that is when the narcissist begins to lose their script. The silent empath doesn't compete for attention. They don't try to win arguments or prove their worth. They don't seek revenge, applause, or validation. They simply watch. And in their watching, they see through. While others get caught in the narcissist's endless loops of ego and confusion, the empath stands still unmoved. They don't play to win. They're not even in the arena. That kind of detachment is rare and dangerous. Because narcissists feed on emotional chaos. They set the fire, then act like the savior. But when someone refuses to burn, the entire manipulation crumbles. When the silent empath doesn't scream, doesn't chase, doesn't beg for clarity, the narcissist is left alone in their own noise, their own game. And games, when played alone, quickly stop being fun. What the narcissist can't understand is this: the empath's silence isn't weakness, it's sovereignty. They don't react because they've outgrown the need to. They're not impressed by charm or disturbed by cruelty. They've seen too much, felt too much, transcended too much, and it's that quiet strength, unapologetic, unshakable, that becomes unbearable to the narcissist. Because control only works on those who are still trying to win something. But the silent empath isn't playing to win, they're playing to remain whole. While the narcissist is trying to impress the crowd, the empath already left the stage. Their peace isn't for sale. Their energy isn't currency. And when they simply observe the narcissist without reacting, without yielding, that act alone becomes the loudest resistance, the kind that needs no words, no drama, no revenge, just presence, pure, piercing presence. You won't always hear it. There's no speech, no dramatic exit, no shouting, enough. But it's there, that subtle shift, that quiet decision. The silent empath doesn't need to draw their boundaries in red flags or ultimatums. Their boundaries live in their energy, in their absence, in the way they start to disengage, not with anger, but with certainty. Narcissists thrive in the gray. They manipulate through ambiguity, stretch the truth until it snaps, test limits until there are none left. They push and pull, not because they're curious, but because they need to find where the control ends. But when they meet a silent empath, they find something they've rarely encountered: an invisible wall that doesn't shake. The empath's no isn't always spoken. It's in the way they stop responding to bait, the way their eyes shift from warm to unreadable, the way their soul quietly shuts the door without needing to slam it. It's not coldness, it's clarity. And it slices through manipulation like a blade through fog. That boundary isn't reactive, it's sacred. And once it's crossed, the empath doesn't need to explain. They simply leave. Narcissists hate clear lines. They need loopholes, cracks, the kind of emotional confusion that allows them to crawl back in under the illusion of change. But the silent empath doesn't grant that, because they've seen the cycle before. They've been through the storm, tasted the chaos, and now they choose stillness, not as an escape, but as a declaration. When a silent empath disconnects, it's not to punish, it's to protect. Their boundary isn't about pushing someone out, it's about preserving what they've spent years healing. They won't scream, they won't debate. They'll simply step back, and the space they create becomes unbearable for the narcissist. Because what the narcissist fears most isn't rejection, it's irrelevance. And when someone stops reacting, stops explaining, stops engaging, it sends a message louder than any confrontation ever could. You no longer have access to me. That's the boundary the narcissist can't cross. Not because it's guarded, but because it no longer even exists within their reach. There's something about silence that unsettles the loud, about calm that unnerves the chaotic. And in the presence of a silent empath, the narcissist begins to twitch internally first, then visibly. Because they can't read you. They can't control the narrative when you're not feeding them the lines. Narcissists are addicted to validation, to applause, to mirrors that flatter. But when the empath doesn't respond on quay, doesn't nod, doesn't laugh, doesn't reassure, panic sets in. To the narcissist, silence isn't neutral, it's threatening. They interpret stillness as judgment, calmness as superiority, detachment as rejection, even when the empath means none of that. Even when they're simply existing in their natural state of inner observation, the narcissist feels exposed, because stillness forces them to sit with themselves, and they have no idea how to survive in that kind of quiet. See, the narcissist doesn't ask, "Who am I?" They ask, "Who do you think I am?" Their identity is built in the reflection of others. And when the empath refuses to perform, refuses to validate the illusion, the narcissist's self-concept begins to crumble. Not through attack, through absence. The silent empath's presence doesn't entertain, it reveals. Without meaning to, they force the narcissist to face the one thing they spend their whole lives avoiding, the empty echo of their own insecurity. And here's the paradox: the more composed the empath is, the more unhinged the narcissist becomes. Because nothing feels more suffocating to someone addicted to attention than someone who simply doesn't give it. Stillness becomes a spotlight, one that shines not outward but inward, and what it illuminates is everything the narcissist has tried to bury. They'll accuse the empath of being cold, distant, arrogant, but what they're really reacting to is the internal discomfort their presence activates. Because in a world that revolves around noise and approval, someone who neither praises nor condemns becomes intolerable. Not because they hurt you, but because they don't need you. And to the narcissist, nothing is more threatening than being irrelevant in the eyes of someone who sees everything and still chooses silence. Carl Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." But narcissists don't want understanding. They want escape. Escape from the truth, from their past, from the parts of themselves they've disowned. And that's where the silent empath becomes more than just a person. They become a mirror. A dangerous, unavoidable mirror. Not the kind that flatters, the kind that reflects, deeply, accurately, quietly. And in that reflection, the narcissist doesn't see love or admiration. They see their shadow, the denied wounds, the buried shame, the unresolved grief. And the empath doesn't have to say a word. Their presence alone reveals what the narcissist has spent a lifetime running from. The empath, having done their own shadow work, no longer fears the darkness. They've sat in their own wounds, wept through their own betrayals, embraced their contradictions. And because of that, they can stand still in front of another, without projecting, without judging, without flinching. But that very integration makes the narcissist crumble. Because when you're hollow inside, facing someone whole feels unbearable. The silent empath doesn't need to expose the narcissist. The narcissist exposes themselves just by being around them. Every manipulation feels louder. Every lie sounds thinner. Every attempt to dominate falls flat. Because the empath doesn't play along, and without someone to perform for, the narcissist is forced to meet their most terrifying opponent, their unfiltered self. But here's the tragedy: they don't know it's a mirror. They think it's an enemy. They lash out, sabotage, gaslight. Not because the empath is doing harm, but because they are reflecting harm. And when you've built your entire identity avoiding responsibility, nothing is more threatening than someone who refuses to carry your emotional baggage for you. The empath becomes the embodiment of the truth the narcissist refuses to face. That healing was always an option. They just never chose it. And that someone else standing in quiet clarity already has. That's not just intimidating, it's devastating. Because the narcissist doesn't just lose control around the silent empath, they lose the illusion of who they thought they were. The silent empath walks through the world like a tuning fork, vibrating with the energy around them. They feel everything. The sadness behind a smile, the tension in a quiet room, the anger masked as charm. And they don't just notice it, they absorb it. Not because they want to, but because that's what empaths do. They feel deeply, often unbearably so. But here's the difference: they don't perform it. While others wear their emotions like armor or bait, the silent empath contains theirs like a sacred ritual. You won't see them explode. You won't catch them chasing closure. They won't storm out or cry on cue. They'll just pause, breathe, and remain still. And that stillness? It's disarming, especially to the narcissist, who depends on emotional feedback to maintain control. Narcissists thrive on reactions. They provoke with precision, pushing buttons, planting seeds of doubt, orchestrating emotional chaos to keep their target off balance. But when the empath doesn't react, when they remain grounded, composed, almost unreadable, the narcissist's entire strategy begins to fail. Because manipulation needs movement, it needs noise, pushback, confusion, but the silent empath offers none. They stay centered not because they're unaffected, but because they've learned that showing emotion to the wrong person is like handing a weapon to the enemy. So they protect it, not out of fear, but out of wisdom. The empath's calm isn't emptiness, it's restraint, and it speaks louder than any outburst ever could. It says, "I see you, I understand what you're trying to do, and I won't give you the reaction you crave." That message, unspoken but undeniable, pierces straight through the narcissist's performance. Because what power does the narcissist have when their tactics fall flat? When their manipulations are met not with chaos but with clarity? What happens when their usual control spirals into impotence? The answer is simple: they lose. Not in a loud, dramatic defeat, but in the quiet unraveling of their illusion, and the empath, still feeling everything, just watches it fall. When most people leave, they announce it. They slam doors, craft final speeches, throw one last emotional grenade before disappearing. But the silent empath doesn't need spectacle. When they walk away, it's not to be seen, it's to be free. And that kind of exit, that quiet, untraceable departure, it leaves a silence that echoes. For the narcissist, nothing is more unbearable than being left in silence. Not because they miss the person, but because they miss the control. They don't grieve the relationship, they grieve the stage, the audience, the emotional access. But the silent empath gives them none of it. No grand explanation, no tears to manipulate, just absence. Pure, haunting absence. The empath doesn't leave to punish. They leave to protect their peace. And they do it so gracefully, so silently, that the narcissist doesn't even realize what's happened until it's too late. One moment, they think they still have influence. The next, they're talking to a ghost. Because the empath's power isn't in confrontation, it's in disengagement. They don't need the narcissist to understand what they did wrong. They don't wait around for apologies that won't come. They simply step out of the game. And by doing so, they strip the narcissist of their most vital resource: attention. See, narcissists fear abandonment more than anything, not because they crave love, but because they crave dominance. When the empath disappears, the narcissist scrambles. Not out of loss, but out of panic. Who am I if I'm no longer being seen through your eyes? But the empath doesn't answer. They don't circle back. They don't re-enter for closure, because they know closure isn't something you get from a narcissist. It's something you give yourself the moment you decide that your well-being matters more than staying loyal to someone who only loved the version of you they could control. And so, the silent empath walks away, not to make noise, but to make space, for healing, for truth, for themselves. And in that silence, something irreversible happens. The narcissist is left to sit with their own emptiness, and the empath, finally, breathes. At first, the narcissist thinks they've won. The silent empath listens. They care. They respond with warmth, with understanding, with empathy that feels endless. To the narcissist, it looks like open terrain room to project, to twist, to mold. But what they don't realize is that while they're performing, the empath is observing, quietly, closely. relentlessly. Because empaths are pattern recognizers, not just of behavior but of energy. They notice the inconsistencies, the subtle rewrites of reality, the way a compliment is followed by a cut, the way control is disguised as care. They don't always call it out right away, not because they're blind, but because they're gathering, not because they're weak, but because they're watching. The narcissist mistakes this silence for softness, but it's not softness, it's strategy. The silent empath doesn't rush to react. They give space for truth to reveal itself, for the narcissist to show their full hand. And they always do, because deception can't sustain itself under the weight of genuine attention. Eventually, the mask slips. The illusion collapses under its own weight, and when it does, the empath is already 3 steps ahead. They don't need evidence in the traditional sense. They read energy like pages in a book, and once they see the cycle idealize, devalue, discard, they stop participating. Not with drama, but with distance, not with confrontation, but with clarity. The narcissist tries again, testing, baiting, shifting tactics, but the empath no longer flinches. Because their silence isn't confusion, it's calculation. It's the moment before the final boundary is drawn, and once drawn, it is irreversible. That's when the narcissist realizes they weren't dealing with someone naive, they were dealing with someone intuitive. Someone who saw the whole play but chose, in mercy, to wait until the last act before walking away. And that realization is unbearable because the narcissist didn't outsmart the empath. They simply underestimated them. Every narcissist wears a mask, polished, charming, carefully constructed to earn admiration, obedience, submission. And most people fall for it at least for a while, but not the silent empath. Because they don't just hear what's said, they feel what's hidden. They don't chase personas, they perceive essence. And for the narcissist, there is no deeper fear than being seen, truly seen. Not the curated version, not the performance, but the fragile, frightened, shame-soaked self that exists beneath the facade. The silent empath doesn't expose this publicly. They don't shout or shame, but they see it. And that quiet recognition is enough. Because when someone sees your truth and stays silent, that silence becomes a mirror you can't escape. It reflects without mercy, it reveals without effort. The narcissist begins to feel stripped, emotionally naked in front of someone who hasn't even spoken, and that's when the unraveling begins. Exposure doesn't always come from being caught. Sometimes it comes from being felt. The empath's presence brings things to the surface. Old wounds, unhealed shame, lies told so often they almost became real. And suddenly, all of it trembles in the weight of their quiet attention. The narcissist tries to deflect, manipulate, regain control. But the empath doesn't engage. They don't accuse, they don't entertain the performance, they simply exist in truth. And that truth becomes unbearable. Because what the narcissist fears most is not judgment, it's invisibility in their true form. If someone sees who they really are and doesn't flinch, doesn't chase, doesn't try to fix it, means the illusion is no longer effective. It means they've lost control not just of the relationship, but of the narrative. And for someone who survives by being seen a certain way, being seen as they are feels like death. The silent empath doesn't need to destroy the narcissist. They don't even try. They simply illuminate what was always there, and sometimes light is more violent than fire. To the narcissist, everything is performance. Love is leverage. Kindness is currency. Even vulnerability is rehearsed, performed just enough to gain sympathy, then withdrawn before it threatens control. Their relationships are not built on truth, but on image. They don't seek connection, they seek reflection, a mirror that flatters, a stage where they always shine. But the silent empath doesn't perform. They reveal. They speak in emotional truths, not rehearsed lines. They want presence, not perfection, meaning not spectacle. And this is where the divide becomes too wide to bridge. Because what the narcissist offers is curated, empty, adorned with just enough charm to pass. But the empath, they ask for what can't be faked. Emotional depth, Psychological honesty, soul-level resonance. The narcissist tries to echo empathy, mimic depth, but eventually, the performance fractures. The mask slips, even if just slightly, and the empath notices. They always notice. Because while the narcissist is playing to the crowd, the empath is watching the pauses, the contradictions, the hollow space behind the words. The mismatch becomes unbearable, not just for the empath who senses the lack of authenticity, but for the narcissist who realizes they're no longer captivating, no longer in control. Their image isn't working, their tactics aren't landing, and most terrifying of all, their emptiness is being seen. Depth demands self-awareness. The narcissist avoids it. Depth requires mutual vulnerability. The narcissist fears it. And when the empath stops meeting them halfway, stops reaching into shallow waters hoping to find something more, the narcissist panics. Because they don't know how to go deeper, they only know how to entertain. But the silent empath doesn't need entertainment. They need truth. And when they stop pretending that surface-level connection is enough, the narcissist is left floundering in a mirror that no longer flatters, an audience that no longer claps. And in that still silence, the narcissist finally understands. They were never in the same story. The empath wasn't playing a role. They were speaking a language the narcissist never bothered to learn. Narcissists depend on emotional hostages. They create dependency, not intimacy, attachment rooted in fear, guilt, or the illusion of need. Because as long as you're afraid to be alone, you're easier to control. That's their blueprint. Isolate, bind, dominate. But what happens when their target doesn't fear solitude at all? Enter the silent empath. Alone doesn't scare them, it centers them. Silence doesn't haunt them, it heals them. They're not looking to be rescued, completed, or distracted. They've already met themselves in the depths, sat in their own shadows, mourned their own losses, rebuilt from their own ruins. Solitude is not a punishment, it's peace. So, when the narcissist tries to use absence as leverage, withdrawal, the cold shoulder, the carefully timed silence meant to provoketh, they're met with something they didn't expect: indifference. The empath doesn't chase. They don't beg. They don't crumble under the weight of someone walking away, because they were never leaning on that person to begin with. This kind of emotional self-sufficiency renders the narcissist powerless. There's no hook, no panic to manipulate, no fear to exploit. The usual weapons, guilt trips, silent treatments, threats of abandonment fall flat, because the empath's peace was never dependent on the narcissist's presence. And here's the quiet revolution. The empath doesn't leave because they've found someone else. They leave because they've found themselves. That kind of wholeness can't be bribed, shamed, or coerced. It's not arrogant, it's sovereign. To the narcissist, this is intolerable, because they survive by creating emotional imbalance. But with the silent empath, the scales never tipped. And when you can't destabilize someone, you can't control them. So the narcissist levisor lashes out hoping to wound, but the empath doesn't bleed the same way. They've already learned that loneliness with integrity is better than connection without truth. They've already chosen solitude over surrender. And that choice, that quiet, steady refusal to be held hostage by fear, becomes the moment the narcissist loses the one thing they thought they had forever: power. The narcissist expects war. They anticipate backlash, insults, slammed doors, and broken pieces. That's the game they know, the one where chaos becomes currency. But when the silent empath catches the manipulation, they don't rage, they don't retaliate. They respond with something infinitely more disarming: compassion. Not the kind that enables, not the kind that excuses, but the kind that says, "I see your pain, but I will not let it consume me." This is not forgiveness born from naivety. It's forgiveness born from evolution, the kind that no longer needs revenge to feel whole, the kind that's been through fire and came out light. To the narcissist, this is alien. Kindness to them is a tool, a leash, a currency, a mask. But when kindness is authentic and unattached, it becomes unbearable. Because they don't know how to use it. They don't know how to twist it into something transactional. And most of all, they don't know how to feel it without being exposed. The silent empath offers no dramatic confrontation, no courtroom of accusations, just a quiet acknowledgement of truth and a release. I see what you are, I understand why, and I'm still choosing to walk away with peace. That kind of mercy, that kind of clarity, it burns deeper than any insult could. Because the narcissist isn't ready for grace. Grace isn't part of their language. It doesn't beg, doesn't plead, doesn't cling. It simply lets go. And nothing dismantles their ego faster than someone who could have destroyed them, but didn't. To be forgiven by someone you tried to break is a mirror many narcissists can't look into, so they scoff, they minimize, they pretend not to care. But deep down, that moment lives forever because in the face of cruelty, they were met with something purer than they ever offered, compassion without strings. And that is a kind of power they will never be able to control. The narcissist sets the stage for drama, the accusation, the twist, the emotional cliffhanger. It's all part of the performance crafted to provoke, to stir, to keep the empath locked in the role of the reactive counterpart. But when the silent empath sees the pattern for what it is, they don't fight it. They leave it. Not always physically. Sometimes it starts internally, a quiet click, a shift in energy, the decision to no longer dance in circles that lead nowhere. And that decision, it's more powerful than any confrontation could ever be. Narcissists expect explosions. They expect screaming exits and tearful breakdowns because those things still revolve around them. But what they never expect is the void, the sudden absence of participation, the moment the empath simply stops playing. There's no final speech, no grand gesture, just silence, disengagement, peace. And in that quiet, the narcissist loses their reflection. The script goes unread. The trap is left untouched. And the audience? Gone? Because the silent empath knows something most don't. You don't win by defeating the narcissist. You win by refusing to be pulled into the story in the first place. By reclaiming your energy, your dignity, your stillness. By no longer offering your pain as proof of love. The narcissist may try to provoke a final response. One last spark, one last plea. But they're met with calm, a door that closes softly, a phone that doesn't ring, a heart that no longer bleeds for what was never real. And that quiet exit? It's not indifference. It's self-respect. It's the moment the empath decides their peace matters more than being understood by someone who never intended to understand them in the first place. For the narcissist, this is intolerable, because without your participation, they no longer have a story. Just a silence that reminds them what they once controlled now walks away, whole and untouched by the chaos they tried to create. The narcissist doesn't just leave chaos behind. They leave confusion, doubt, emotional debris pieces of someone who once believed, once cared, once stayed. Most people crumble in that aftermath. They question their worth. They stay stuck in the echo of, "What did I do wrong?" But the silent empath alchemizes the wreckage. They don't stay shattered. They rebuild, but not as they were stronger. Clearer, whole. Carl Jung called it individuation, the process of becoming your truest self by confronting the parts you once denied. And that's exactly what the empath does. They face the shadow. Not just the narcissist, but their own. The part that needed approval, that longed for love in places that only offered performance, that tolerated confusion because they thought they could fix it. They face all of it. And through that facing, something rare is born. Power that doesn't dominate but liberates. A kind of strength that doesn't make noise but radiates. Because the silent empath doesn't just survive the narcissist. They transcend them. They take the betrayal, the gaslighting, the emotional theft, and they turn it into insight, into boundaries, into a deeper connection with their own soul. What breaks others builds them. Because while others are looking outward for closure, the empath turns inward for clarity. They realize the most dangerous thing wasn't the narcissist, it was the part of themselves that stayed too long. And once they meet that part with compassion, the cycle ends, not in flames, but in awakening. The narcissist wanted them to stay wounded, but they left empowered. They wanted them to doubt themselves, but they left more certain than ever. That is the final twist the narcissist never expected. The damage they tried to cause became the very thing that gave the empath their fire. And from that fire, the empath walks forward not just healed, but reborn. They never say it out loud, but they remember. Years later, in passing moments, in echoes, the narcissist remembers the silent empath not because of drama or destruction or some grand goodbye, but because of the stillness they left behind, the absence that echoed louder than any fight ever could. Because the empath didn't disappear in chaos, they walked away in truth. And truth is something the narcissist cannot forget, because it lingers, it haunts. It follows them into the next relationship, the next performance, the next cycle of control. A quiet reminder that there was once someone who saw everything and still chose not to stay. The silent empath becomes the one who got away, but not in the romanticized sense, not in nostalgia or longing, in a deeper, more destabilizing way, because they didn't leave the narcissist with guilt. They left them with reality. And that reality burns. They were never fooled, never broken, never destroyed. They simply chose themselves. And when someone chooses themselves in the face of manipulation, it plants something in the narcissist's psyche that cannot be erased. The realization that they weren't enough to keep someone dependent, that someone saw the truth and walked away anyway. That memory becomes a mirror the narcissist keeps covered. But every so often, it slips, and they remember the quiet eyes that saw through them, the calm voice that never raised, even when the chaos screamed, the exit that was so soft, yet left a silence that still hasn't been filled. The empath didn't leave to be remembered, but they will be. Not because of who they were to the narcissist, but because of what they revealed. And that truth, once seen, can never be unseen. You won't see them shouting. They don't lead with noise. They don't beg for followers or force themselves into rooms not meant for them. The silent empath doesn't wear power like armor, they carry it like breath. Quiet, consistent, undeniable. In a world addicted to validation, they choose presence. In a world obsessed with performance, they choose truth. And that choice? That quiet refusal to conform to chaos, to mirror manipulation, to perform pain just to be seen, that is a revolution. They are not loud, but they are seismic, because stillness, in a world that feeds on distraction, is radical. Depth, in a culture of surfaces, is defiance. And emotional clarity, in an age of confusion, is the sharpest kind of rebellion. The silent empath doesn't fight for power. They embody it through boundaries, through compassion, through the steady decision to live in alignment with their own soul, no matter who misunderstands it. This isn't weakness, it's mastery, not the kind that controls others, but the kind that reclaims self. They are not here to fix broken people or dance for approval. They are here to feel, to heal, and when necessary, to walk away without looking back. That is what makes them unforgettable. Not noise, not drama, integrity. And maybe you've recognized yourself in these words. Maybe you've always felt more than you could explain, seen more than you could say, endured in silence while others thought you didn't notice. This is your reminder that silence was never emptiness, it was wisdom, that depth was never weakness, it was discernment, that walking away wasn't giving up, it was waking up. You are not too sensitive. You are tuned in. You are not distant. You are selective with your energy, and you are not alone. You are part of something larger, a quiet uprising of souls who are no longer willing to be manipulated, minimized, or moved by anything less than truth. So honor your silence, trust your depth. And remember, in a world that profits from your confusion, your clarity is a form of resistance. This is the quiet revolution, and you, silent empath, are already leading it. Want to hear more of this? Then click on the video on the right-hand side, which is even more insane.